We knew this day was coming. We knew that he was going to want to leave and to have his life back. We knew that that freedom flight was nothing but a fraud of a flight that he was taking. And so now Harry has confirmed that, hey, I want to go back.
Because it is a medical impossibility. So how stupid does this woman think we are? And let's get ready for this video. My God, this woman, when she was pregnant, and we learned later that she had preeclampsia, and this is why she needed to use a surrogate afterwards, because
rival Prince William is so that he doesn't have to be with his wife in Montecito full time. He can at least spend periods of the year.
Everyone knew this moment would arrive, not with an announcement, not with a statement, but quietly, the way stories always crack before they break. For years, Prince Harry's departure from the UK was sold as liberation. A freedom flight. A man choosing peace over pressure, love over institution. That was the story, carefully framed, repeated until it hardened into truth. But what if that flight wasn't freedom at all? What if it was delay? In recent weeks, whispers from multiple corners of royal commentary have converged on the same unsettling idea. Harry didn't leave to escape the system. He left to protect a story that was never meant to be examined too closely. And now, that story may be collapsing under its own weight. According to sources who claim familiarity with behind-the-scenes discussions, Harry's recent movements suggest something very different from defiance. They suggest retreat. Not emotional retreat, strategic retreat. Because when silence no longer shields you, proximity to power becomes survival. What triggered it wasn't media pressure or public criticism. It wasn't Netflix backlash or brand fatigue. It was something far more private and far more dangerous if mishandled. Allegations. Not proof, not confirmation. But allegations that, once raised in legal and institutional contexts, cannot simply be ignored. For years, the Sussex narrative around family, privacy, and protection has been tightly controlled. Every appearance timed. Every announcement curated. Every absence explained as dignity. But critics argue that control itself became the problem. Behind closed doors, according to unverified accounts shared by commentators and legal observers, Harry may have been confronted with inconsistencies that could no longer be explained away by PR strategy alone. Not because anyone wanted exposure, but because systems don't care about intention. They care about records. And once records enter the conversation, silence stops being neutral. What's important to understand here is this. No one is alleging criminal behavior. No one is presenting verified evidence. What's being discussed, and what allegedly alarmed Harry, are procedural vulnerabilities. The kind that don't explode immediately, but quietly destabilize everything built on top of them. Sources claim there was a private meeting, not with media, not with friends, but with a legal consultant. A conversation without cameras, without talking points. Just questions. Questions like, what exists on paper? What exists digitally? What could be requested, even accidentally, if scrutiny increased? According to these accounts, that was the moment Harry realized something critical. The story he had been protecting was no longer just emotional. It was structural. And structures can collapse. What followed wasn't anger, not betrayal, not rage. People close to Harry describe something else entirely: exhaustion. The kind that comes from holding a narrative together long after it stops making sense. He wasn't defending anymore. He was calculating. That's when the UK re-entered the picture. Because whether people like it or not, the monarchy isn't just a family. It's a machine designed to absorb chaos quietly. It manages risk, contains fallout, and buries instability beneath layers of protocol. Distance from that machine works, until it doesn't. Critics argue that Harry's return wasn't about reconciliation or nostalgia. It was about putting himself inside the only structure capable of handling what might come next. And this is where the most controversial allegations enter the conversation. Allegations that must be framed carefully. Online commentators have circulated claims involving surrogacy, timelines, and documentation. These claims remain unverified. They have not been proven in court or confirmed by official sources. But they persist because they raise procedural questions rather than emotional ones. Questions like, why were certain details handled with extreme discretion? Why were public timelines unusually opaque? Why does so much rely on trust rather than documentation? One figure has emerged repeatedly in speculative discussions, identified only as DL by commentators. According to these claims, DL is alleged to have been involved in the children's births in a way that was never publicly acknowledged. To be clear, this is allegation, not fact. What makes the claim disruptive isn't its content, it's the implication. If any part of the public narrative doesn't align with procedural reality, it becomes a vulnerability. Not because of morality, but because institutions run on alignment. According to those pushing this theory, DL remained silent not out of fear, but compliance, bound by confidentiality, trusting that discretion equaled safety. And for a time, it did. But silence only works when everyone maintains it. Critics claim the public story, hospital steps, announcements, appearances may have been performance rather than documentation. Again, this is speculative. But it's precisely the kind of speculation institutions take seriously because performance doesn't hold up under audit. This is where Harry's role becomes complicated. Supporters argue he acted out of love, out of loyalty, that he believed protecting privacy justified compliance, that silence was safety. But insiders claim that once legal frameworks entered the conversation, once advisors began asking procedural questions instead of emotional ones, the cost of silence became clear. If discrepancies exist, they don't just affect reputation. They affect records, succession, inheritance, trust, and trust is currency in institutions. This explains why, according to observers, Harry didn't go to the media. He didn't deny anything. He didn't counterattack. He went inward, back into the system he once rejected, because rebellion is powerful until the risk becomes systemic. Inside palace walls, processes replace feelings, lawyers replace narratives, verification replaces belief. That environment isn't comforting, but it's stabilizing. Sources suggest Harry's questions became narrow and urgent. What do the records show? What could surface? How do we minimize harm, especially to the children? Not titles, not optics. Harm, and that shift matters. Because once a story outgrows the people protecting it, control disappears. The only option left is containment. Harry's silence now isn't confidence, it's calculation. And if these allegations are completely false, silence still makes sense, because challenging them invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites records. Records don't forget. In Part 2, we'll examine why containment, not confrontation, may be the only move left, how institutions prepare for stories they hope never surface, and why this moment marks the end of rebellion and the beginning of survival. What followed Harry's return to the United Kingdom was not a dramatic confrontation, but something far quieter and, in many ways, more unsettling. Inside palace walls, the conversation shifted from emotion to procedure. Advisors, lawyers, and senior officials reportedly approached the situation with the same methodical calm the institution has relied on for centuries. Allegations, not conclusions, became the working language. Every claim was treated as unverified. Every assumption was challenged. Nothing was accepted at face value. Insiders stress an important distinction here. No public authority confirmed any of the allegations circulating online. What existed instead was a growing awareness that narratives, especially ones repeated long enough, can create vulnerabilities even when they are unproven. In that sense, the danger was not truth or falsehood alone, but exposure. Harry's role inside the palace became that of a witness to his own life story, watching it deconstructed not for scandal, but for risk. Friends close to him describe a man stripped of illusion. The confidence he once displayed in interviews, the certainty with which he defended choices, had faded. In its place was a cautious restraint. He reportedly spoke less and listened more, allowing teams to outline scenarios that ranged from benign misunderstanding to worst-case reputational fallout. None of these scenarios were predictions. They were contingencies. At the center of every discussion were the children. Sources say Harry repeatedly redirected conversations back to one question: how do we protect them from the consequences of adult decisions and public speculation? Titles, public sympathy, even his own reputation were secondary. What mattered was ensuring that whatever the truth ultimately proved to be, the children would not become collateral damage in a media storm fueled by conjecture and outrage. This was where Harry's understanding of power fundamentally changed. Outside the institution, power had looked like control over narrative, choosing when to speak, when to sue, when to remain silent. Inside, power was procedural. It meant documentation, verification, and patience. It meant letting systems move slowly, deliberately, sometimes frustratingly so. And for the first time, Harry appeared willing to accept that pace. Observers note the irony. For years, Harry had framed the monarchy as restrictive and outdated, an obstacle to truth and authenticity. Yet now, faced with allegations that threatened to spiral beyond any individual's control, that same rigidity offered containment. Rules limited damage. Process replaced chaos. Silence was no longer avoidance, it was strategy. Meanwhile, outside palace walls, speculation intensified. Commentators dissected past interviews, photographs, timelines, and public appearances, often drawing sweeping conclusions from incomplete information. Social media amplified theories at a speed no institution could match. In this environment, even denials risked fueling further scrutiny. Insiders say this was precisely why Harry avoided public response. Any statement, no matter how carefully worded, would be interpreted as confirmation by one side or deception by the other. So he stayed quiet. This silence, however, should not be confused with inaction. According to sources, legal teams continued reviewing records, not to prove anything publicly, but to ensure internal consistency. What had been said, when it had been said, and how it aligned with formal documentation mattered immensely. Even if allegations proved unfounded, inconsistencies alone could become weapons in the hands of critics. Harry's private reckoning deepened during this period. Those close to him described nights of insomnia and long walks across palace grounds, moments where the weight of the past decade pressed heavily on him. Regret, they say, was not about love or loyalty, but about assumptions. He had assumed that good intentions guaranteed good outcomes. He had assumed that protecting privacy meant controlling risk. He had assumed that distance from the institution equaled safety. None of those assumptions held anymore. Instead, Harry confronted a more uncomfortable truth. Narratives do not disappear just because they are denied. They linger, evolve, and adapt, especially in the absence of clarity. And once children are involved, the moral calculus shifts entirely. Protecting them required relinquishing personal pride and embracing a system he once rejected. Importantly, insiders emphasize that this shift was not about blaming Meghan publicly. Whatever private emotions Harry may have felt, the institutional approach avoided personal accusations. Allegations remained allegations. The focus stayed on mitigation, not judgment. This distinction mattered, both legally and ethically. Turning private family matters into public condemnation would only escalate harm. As days turned into weeks, Harry's presence in the UK became less mysterious and more telling. He was not attending high-profile events. He was not giving interviews. He was not reclaiming a public role. He was, by all accounts, preparing for a future defined less by narrative and more by accountability. Some observers interpreted this as surrender. Others saw it as maturity. Those closest to Harry suggest it was something else entirely. Acceptance. Acceptance that some stories cannot be controlled, only managed. Acceptance that silence, when used deliberately, can be more responsible than speech. Acceptance that survival, of family, legacy, and stability, sometimes means stepping back rather than fighting forward. Whether the allegations that triggered this reckoning will ever be substantiated remains unknown. What is clear is that their impact has already reshaped Harry's priorities. The rebellious prince, once defined by defiance, now appears guided by caution. The man who once sought freedom from the institution now relies on it to absorb uncertainty. In the end, Harry's return was not about reclaiming the past or rewriting history. It was about confronting the limits of individual control in a world where perception moves faster than truth. It was about recognizing that protecting the future sometimes requires standing still, letting systems work, and enduring silence. And perhaps most significantly, it marked the quiet end of a chapter defined by rebellion and the beginning of one shaped by responsibility.